The GPS had been sitting dark on my dashboard for 3 hours before I turned the key. I wasn't sure I was going to do this. I'd promised myself I wouldn't come back, or at least not like this. Not in the middle of the night, not alone, not without some better reason than a feeling I couldn't name. But here I was, pulling away from the parking garage of a life that felt increasingly like it belonged to someone else, heading toward a place I'd spent the last decade trying to outrun. The rain had started somewhere around the city limits. Not the soft, cinematic kind they use in those old commercials. Real rain. The kind that makes you lean forward and grip the wheel a little tighter. The kind that turns headlights from other cars into blurred watercolor brush strokes in the darkness. My windshield wipers were on the fastest setting, and even then, they could barely keep up. I'd forgotten how the rain felt here. Heavier somehow, like it carried weight from the lake. I was 43 years old. That detail kept surfacing in my mind as the miles accumulated. 43, driving through the night toward a town where I'd been 17 and certain about almost everything. The math was impossible. That person couldn't still exist, and yet something had pulled me back anyway. Not nostalgia, I don't think. Nostalgia is gentler than this. This felt more like an itch I'd been trying to ignore for so long that I'd finally stopped pretending my nails wouldn't work. The highway was nearly empty. Occasionally, a truck would materialize from the rain, like something being born, and then disappear again behind me. I found myself wondering about the people inside those cabs, where they were going, whether they were running toward something or away from it. I'd read somewhere that most long-distance drivers are running from something. Most people are, probably. We just dress it up differently. A career change, a fresh start, a new city where nobody knows your history. But the highway has a way of equalizing things. Out here at 2 a.m, everyone's just driving. Everyone's just moving through the darkness, trying to get somewhere. My phone had died around 11. That was probably for the best. My brother would have called by now. He'd be worried, asking questions I didn't have answers to yet. My therapist would have wanted to unpack this, to discuss what I was hoping to find, what I was afraid of finding. But right then, with only the hum of the engine and the metronome of the wipers, I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. The road has that mercy. It lets you exist in the gap between who you were and who you've become, without requiring you to choose. The landscape started to change somewhere around 4 a.m. The forest thickened on both sides of the highway. These were the Appalachian foothills, the green that had seemed so suffocating when I was young, so desperate to escape. I remembered driving past these same trees when I was 18, packed my car with everything I owned, and felt like I was finally gasping for air. Now, at 43, the forest felt different. Not confining, just old. Older than me. Older than my regrets. There was something steadying in that. The rain had started to ease by the time I exited the highway. The smaller roads were worse in some ways. Narrower, with fewer guardrails. The asphalt cracked and buckling. But they were familiar. My hands knew these curves, without my mind having to think too hard about them. That felt like both a gift and a curse. Muscle memory is a strange thing. Your body remembers what your mind has been trying so hard to forget. My shoulders relaxed slightly as I rounded a curve I'd driven maybe 1,000 times, 30 years ago. I passed the diner first. The old Sunrise Diner, painted that faded yellow that probably hadn't been refreshed since I left. The parking lot was empty, except for one car I didn't recognize. It would have been just before dawn then, that blue-black hour when the world feels like it belongs to insomniacs and night shift workers. I'd spent so many mornings in that diner, sitting in the back booth with coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in 1994, because it might have been. We'd talked about everything in that booth. Dreams that felt enormous and urgent and real. Dreams about places that weren't here, about people we'd become, about all the ways we were going to break free. Most of those people never left. Some left and came back. A few of us got out and stayed out. Until now. Until I'd driven through the night. Because something inside me had finally whispered that getting out wasn't the same thing as healing. That running had its own weight, and I'd been carrying it so long that I barely noticed anymore. The town proper started to reveal itself gradually. The welcome sign, Hartwick, population 7,203, was only half a lie. We'd probably never had that many people. But it had always made us sound substantial, like we mattered. The high school appeared next. That same brick building with the same tired parking lot. They'd built a new football field at some point. That was new. Everything else looked exactly the same, or exactly diminished, and I couldn't quite figure out which. I drove slowly now. Not because I was trying to delay. I was past that, but because the town deserved to be seen. The main street with its handful of businesses, some of them still there, some of them with different names now. The bank where I'd opened my first account when I was 14, convinced I'd save enough money to leave before I turned 20. I made it to 21, which I'd counted as close enough to a success. The hardware store with the wooden porch, the library where I'd spent entire afternoons losing myself in novels, books about bigger places and larger lives. The rain had softened to a drizzle now. The sky was beginning its slow shift from black to grey, to something approximating dawn. I could see the shapes of the houses more clearly now. Older neighborhoods, the kind where families had lived for generations in the same homes. I'd never found that comforting. I'd found it suffocating. The idea that your entire life could be mapped out by geography, that you'd wake up in the same room where you'd slept as a child, that the forest would always be at the edge of your consciousness, holding you in place. But driving through these streets in the half-light, I noticed something I hadn't before. The houses had changed. Not the structures themselves, but the ways people had made them their own. New porches, fresh paint, gardens, a basketball hoop in one driveway, carefully tended flowering bushes in another. These were people holding on, yes, but they were holding on consciously. They'd made choices to stay or to return, and they'd done the work of making their lives mean something here. That took a different kind of courage than leaving did. I was only now beginning to understand that. My childhood home appeared on the left, and I slowed down almost without deciding to. The house looked smaller than it should have, which I'd read was the universal experience of returning to your past. But it still caught something in my chest. The oak tree in the front yard had grown enormous. That tree was probably now as tall as the house itself. My father had planted it the day I was born. That's what the story went. I'd spent entire summers in that tree, reading, hiding, planning my escape. I wondered if I'd ever actually climbed it, or if my memory had invented that detail to make my childhood feel more adventurous than it had been. The house had changed ownership 4 times. I'd learned from a casual internet search 6 months ago. A family with 3 kids lived there now. I could see a swing set partially hidden in the back. A red bicycle tipped over in the driveway. Their childhood was happening in my childhood home, and the world had continued on, and that was okay. That was more than okay. I kept driving. I wasn't ready to stop yet. There was another location I needed to reach, one that had drawn me back more than the house itself. The overlook, the place where we'd gone to look out over the valley, to feel like we were on the edge of something. Older kids had gone there at night. We'd gone there at all hours, at the beginning of things, at the end of them. It had been our access point to feeling larger than the town. The road up the ridge was steeper than I remembered, tighter. The forest pressed in on both sides now, and the rain had picked up again, just slightly. The sky was gradually lightening. I'd be arriving at the overlook right around sunrise, which felt significant, though I wasn't quite sure why. Arrivals and departures usually matter most at threshold moments. Dawn, dusk, the space between sleep and waking. I was thinking about that when I rounded the final curve and saw the overlook parking area ahead, and my breath did something complicated in my chest. I pulled in slowly, and the gravel crunched under the tires in a way that sounded exactly like it had sounded 30 years ago. That was impossible, of course. Gravel was gravel. Sound was just sound. But the body knows things the mind hasn't quite caught up to. My hands on the wheel were shaking slightly. I turned off the engine. The rain was audible now, the only sound. Just the rain on the roof of the car, patterned and patient, like a language I'd known once, but had spent years forgetting. I looked out through the windshield at the overlook, at the valley beyond it, dimly visible in the pre-dawn grayness. The valley I'd spent so much time despising. The valley that had felt like a prison. The valley that looked, from here, like it had always been more forgiving than I'd been willing to admit. I got out of the car. The air was cool and wet, and smelled exactly like it smelled. Like rain and earth and the particular green of this particular place. I'd tried to distance myself from that smell for decades, treating it like something that had marked me, claimed me. But standing here now, at 43, I realized something that might have been obvious all along. Smell is memory, yes, but memory is also just evidence that you lived, that you were here, that this place shaped you, and you survived it, and you became someone anyway, even without knowing it. I walked to the railing. The valley spread out below, still mostly dark, but lightening incrementally. I could see the river snaking through it, silver in the emerging dawn. I could see the 2 roads that cut across it diagonally. I could see, if I looked hard enough, the small collection of lights that was downtown, 7 miles away, where people were probably just waking up, starting their days, living their lives in this place that I'd decided wasn't big enough for me. I'd spent so many years thinking that leaving meant I'd won, that by moving away, by building a different life in a different city, I'd somehow proven something. To whom I'd never quite figured out. To the town, to my family, to my 17-year-old self, who'd been so certain that anything was better than here. But standing at the overlook as the dawn broke, I understood something else. I wasn't here to prove anything anymore. I wasn't here to reclaim anything, or to finally lay something to rest. I was here because a part of me needed to know if I could see this place without anger, without the need to escape it again immediately. And the answer, as the sun crested the ridge and started to illuminate the valley, was yes. I could. I was. The anger had hollowed out somewhere over the years. It had transformed into something quieter, something I could live with. There was no dramatic moment of forgiveness or reconciliation. There was just the dawn, and the rain still falling softly, and a man in his 40s standing at a railing, looking out at the place where he'd been born, understanding finally that you could leave a place without hating it, and you could return to it without becoming someone you'd outgrown. The two things didn't have to negate each other. They could coexist. They did coexist. I stood there for a long time. The sun continued its ascent. The valley continued to reveal itself in layers. First the shapes of houses, then their colors, then the details of smoke from chimneys, of movement, of life happening in all its ordinary ways. I thought about the people I'd known here, how many of them I'd lost touch with completely, how others had found me on social media and sent messages I'd never answered, how some of them had left too, and some had stayed, and both choices had been valid in their own ways. I thought about my parents, both still living here, both older now than I'd ever truly comprehended. We called on holidays. We had pleasant surface conversations. I'd told them not to expect a visit. But maybe, I thought, standing in the dawn light at the overlook, maybe that could change. Not because I owed them anything, but because I'd finally stopped needing to prove something by my distance. The drive down from the overlook was slower than the drive up. I took the switchbacks carefully, respectfully. The rain had stopped completely now. The sky was clearing to a pale blue. It was going to be a beautiful day in Hartwick. That seemed important somehow. I wanted the town to have nice weather. I wanted it to look its best, even though I knew it didn't matter. It was beautiful regardless. It had probably always been beautiful. I'd just been too busy despising it to notice. I ended up at a small park on the south side of town, one I'd forgotten about completely until I saw the sign. I parked and got out and walked to the small pavilion where, I remembered now, friends used to gather on summer evenings. I sat on one of the benches and listened to the dripping of rain from the pavilion roof. The birds beginning their morning songs, the distant sound of the world coming awake. My phone had enough battery life now that I could turn it on. Messages from my brother. Worried texts. One message from a number I didn't recognize. Someone named Marcus, who said he'd gone to high school with me and had found my number from an old yearbook. He said he was visiting town this week and hoped maybe we could get coffee. That detail alone felt significant. The past reaching out. Old connections existing in a suspended state, waiting to see if they might mean something again. I thought about Marcus. I couldn't picture his face, but his name didn't evoke the defensive feeling it might have a year ago. I sat in the pavilion as the morning grew brighter and warmer. I thought about the next steps, about whether I would drive back to the city today or stay a few nights, about calling my parents and suggesting that coffee, about Marcus's message and what it might mean to reconnect with people from this phase of my life, about the house with the swing set in my childhood home's backyard, and the new field at the high school, and the diner still serving coffee that tasted like the past. But mostly I just sat. Mostly I listened to the rain finishing its departure, and the birds tuning up their voices, and the ordinary sounds of a town waking up. Mostly I felt the difference between running and returning, the difference between escape and arrival. They'd both been necessary, but they weren't the same thing. They'd never been the same thing. By the time the sun had fully cleared the ridge and was beginning to warm the morning, I felt something like peace settle into my shoulders. Not a dramatic transformation, not a movie moment, just the quiet recognition that I was, in fact, large enough to contain multiple versions of myself. The person who'd left at 18, the person who'd stayed away, the person sitting now in a pavilion in my childhood town, watching the day emerge, understanding finally that you could belong to a place and still choose to leave. You could leave and still have something to return to. You could return and still know who you'd become. I started the car as the morning truly arrived and drove slowly back toward the main part of town. I wasn't going anywhere yet. I thought I might get breakfast at the Sunrise Diner after all. I thought I might see if anyone I knew still worked there. I thought I might sit in a booth and have coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in 1994. And for once, instead of hating that, I might just sit with it. Let it be what it was. Let this place be what it was. Let myself be who I'd become, right here, right now, in the place I'd thought I needed to escape to become. The rain had passed. The day was clear and bright, and I was finally, after all these years, ready to come home.